Okay, so for topic two of today's Trans Nerdy podcast, the nerdy topic of the Trans Nerdy podcast, I wanted to talk a little bit about my religious beliefs. Now, you may be thinking, what the hell does religious beliefs have to do with nerdy topics? And I will get into that, but I will say that my religious beliefs and what I believe in my core has a lot to do with, and please don't laugh initially, a lot to do with Battlestar Galactica and Westworld and TV shows like that, and this idea of transhumanism and the singularity, along with Jewish mysticism and Buddhism. So, if you want to see how all those things are connected, stick around and I will tell you about my religious beliefs and what I believe. So, first things first, what I generally tell people that I am, if someone sort of came up and asked, what what is the name of your religion, or what is your religious beliefs? I would have to say, probably most honestly, agnostic theist. Now, agnostic is fairly self-explanatory. A lot of people know what agnostic is. Is basically you're saying we don't know. I don't want to say one way or the other whether I'm an atheist or a specific religion. A lot of people think that agnosticism is sort of being between atheism and religion, and it can be viewed that way. But the way I sort of view it, especially as an agnostic theist, and what agnostic theist is actually a bit more of a different place. But again, sorry, agnosticism is usually seen as between atheism and sort of full-on religious belief. Sort of saying, I don't know which one it is. It could be one or the other. There could not be a God. There could be a God. I sort of want to wait to see proof of that. Agnostic theism, at least in my interpretation of it for myself, is slightly different in that it's not saying I'm between atheism and another religion, but it's actually a bit more saying that you're sort of between religions, in that I don't believe a specific thing because I don't think there's any proof to prove any of them. But I do believe that I do think that there is something larger than ourselves, and there is something bigger than myself within this big universe. This is just a slight tangent, but I just always think of this story of when I'm an Eagle Scout, and to get your Eagle Scout, you have to, when you finished all the requirements for Eagle Scouts, you have to go in front of the Board of Review, which is sort of like the top people in the council for the Boy Scouts sort of interview you. And where I was, they literally we were in a courtroom because that's the space they were in. They were sitting in the judges' seats, and I was in a small chair, no table or anything, just sort of looking up at them. So it's a very intimidating process, and they go through and just basically judge you as a person. And one of the tenets of scouting, the whole Scout oath Scout laws go, I, Scout, is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And the last thing there being reverent. So, being a truthful Boy Scout, and a lot of the Scouts basically say you have to believe in a higher power, and you have to show reverence to that power. It doesn't necessarily matter what you believe in, but you just have to believe in something. And so, atheism, and in a way agnosticism, because a lot of people lump agnosticism in with atheism, had they sort of had this idea that, if you're an atheist, you're not following one of the Boy Scout laws, which isn't technically true. I don't necessarily agree with that interpretation that atheists can't be good Eagle Scouts, but so it's like that whole idea of like, oh, can an atheist hold themselves accountable? Can they be moral people without having sort of a higher power to hold them to that? And that's a whole different argument for a whole different podcast. But that's sort of their belief. So when they asked me, "Are you reverent?" and what are your beliefs? And I, being a trustworthy scout, I said, "I am I'm agnostic theist," and I had to defend that position. And then, how do you show reverence as an agnostic theist? If you're a Catholic, it's very easy to say, I go to church every Sunday, and that's how I show my reverence. I help out in that community. But as an agnostic theist, what do you do to show reverence? And what I always tried to do to show my reverence is try to learn as much as I possibly can about as many religions as possible, and show basic respect to each of them and help out within those communities where I can, and never discredit any of them, but always try to listen and learn and grow within those communities and grow my own conceptualization of what religion is and what I believe specifically. So, while again I am agnostic theist and I don't necessarily believe any one thing, and I'm more than welcome to being swayed to something else in the future, and maybe I will sway to something else in the future as I've swayed from different things in the past. Um, but the main thing that I believe now is sort of this weird mixture of a lot of different things. They all kind of come down to this basic idea of connection. I really believe in sort of science as well. And in science, we can see that a lot of things are connected, whether through gravity or electricity or a lot of things. You know, there's gravitational forces where the sun connects to all these planets and affects all these planets, and all the gravities of all the galaxies sort of connect to each other because they're all have gravitational pulls on each other. I don't know, I'm not a super strong physically minded person, but if you think about it, like, look, we have little cells that form cell groups that form, they have DNA that form cells, that form cell groups, that form organs, that form organ systems, that form people, that form communities, that form nations, that form planets, that planets form solar systems, and solar systems form galaxies, and galaxies form universes. And how do we know that a universe isn't just a single cell of another larger organism out there, which is actually something that, with my very layman knowledge of it, that Hindus believe that we're all sort of existing in the dream of a god. And again, that's me with my layman knowledge of Hinduism. But yeah, that sort of like X-Men 1 ending where it sort of like pulls out and out of our galaxy, and we're just like a collar on some cat's collar. We're just a leash on a cat's collar of the entire universe. Um, so I feel like we're all connected in that way, and that idea of connection. And how I bring this in to a sort of religious viewpoint is sort of actually a connection between Jewish mysticism and Buddhism. And again, this is a very layman's explanation. And I got this from a great book called The Jew and the Lotus, which is a book about these group of Jewish scholars that went to meet with the Dalai Lama and actually talked about with him their beliefs and how it connected to Buddhism, and how it actually very surprisingly similar their belief systems could be, even though Buddhism was sometimes seen as sort of atheistic and not even a religion at all. Um, but my camera might be dying in a second, so if I cut out a video, please forgive me. But for the most part, so I got distracted by the blinking light of the camera saying, "Your battery's gonna die. You need to change me, so I should probably hurry up." But Jewish mysticism, Buddhism. So there's this idea that sort of in Jewish mysticism that, and this is my way of explaining it, not necessarily a Jewish mystic's way of explaining it, but think of God as a donut, where God is this sort of circular space that exists. And inside, in the middle, there's nothing. There's nothing there. It's just emptiness. And so God wanted to feel connection with something other than himself. So to do this, and again, God doesn't necessarily have to be a singular entity, but it could be many different things. And I'll get to that a little bit further down this discussion. But God wanted to have a relationship with something other than himself, so he created something in that null space to have a relationship with. But the only thing he could do was form it out of himself. He had to take part of himself to put into this thing to have a relationship with himself. So he created this thing. He looked at it and said, "You are me, and I am you, and we're going to have a relationship." And that thing, whether it be man or anything like that, and I can get into deeper on that, but to just sort of keep it going, that thing couldn't comprehend it and exploded into 1,000 different sparks. And all we are as human beings are these tiny sparks of this God essence, and all we have to do is elevate the sparks. We be good people to elevate these sparks, to move up, to try to connect all these sparks together, to form that entity again, to have that full relation, to be God at once, and to also have a relationship with God in that same space. So we are made in the image of God, just like the Bible says. We are made in God's image, just maybe not necessarily the image that we see as ourselves. Human beings with 5 to 10 fingers, 10 toes, things like that. But we are made in God's image in a way. And you see how that connects with Buddhism, with we're all trying to reach nirvana, moving up, and reincarnation, and moving up to reaching that high level of nirvana. Very similar. Just doesn't have the context of relating to God in there. So I've talked about all that. How does that connect to something like Battlestar Galactica and Terminator and Westworld, you ask? Well, I also believe in this thing called the singularity. Now, what the singularity is, for those who don't know, and it's very clearly being shown in the TV show Westworld, it's very much about the singularity, is when humanity creates something that is smarter than ourselves, that is more able to think and feel and do things better than we can, then we as human beings suddenly become obsolete, because we've made something better than ourselves that can work better than ourselves, can create better than ourselves, have artistic creativity better than ourselves, or intelligence better than ourselves. And once it can do that, we're not needed anymore, because that thing can go on to create better things past us. It's already better than us, so it's going to make things better from there. And we as humans are obsolete. Now, generally in popular culture, we as humans are sort of terrified of this outcome. We see it in things like The Terminator or The Matrix, where once the singularity happens, humanity is just going to be murdered because we're seen as lesser than and obsolete and violent and destructive and need to be destroyed. But I don't necessarily see that as scary. Because what the singularity means, and again, it's kind of like the idea of God. God created something. If you're going back to this idea of God created something to connect with, He created something other than Himself to connect with. And that's what we're doing when we are working towards the singularity. We're working on making something to have a connection with, to have intelligence that's not ourselves. And so once we do this, are we God in a way? Are we becoming God by making something other than ourselves that may actually be better than ourselves and trying to have a relationship with it? And that's what sort of Westworld's postulating, that we're creating our children and we can impart the best parts of ourselves, love, compassion, but also try and do better. Try and teach them to be better, to try and teach them to move past violence and sort of jealousy and things like that. Maybe we'll succeed, maybe not. We're not exactly perfect teachers and parents in any way, shape, or form, but maybe we can give our children whatever we create next something better. That's what transhumanists believe. They're trying to create a post-human. And that's very much what Battlestar Galactica is about. It's sort of, they created a post-human. Now in Battlestar Galactica, it's very much God is a present force. If you watch that show, spoilers, God is actually a character in that show. And so this idea of creating the Cylons and creating these robots actually isn't done in conjunction and at the will of God, and that this cycle of creating things better than ourselves is something that God works with us on to do to help create something better. Westworld sort of has a more atheistic view of it in saying that, and this is maybe what I believe a little bit more, is that we create the thing that's after us, and then we as the creators have to die because we've become obsolete. We don't mean anything anymore. The world belongs to those who come after us now, not to ourselves. And so we sort of move out of it. Whereas in Battlestar Galactica, we learn, and spoilers again for the end of the show, humans are a combination of Cylon and man. We work together, we combine to make something greater than ourselves, whereas Westworld sort of, and again, that show hasn't ended, so maybe it's something different, but that show is very much about we become obsolete so that this next thing can come after us and grow and have the chance to be the next generation, be our legacy, and do their own thing and create their own world. So maybe we as humans, when God created us in His image, maybe we killed God because God was obsolete and we were better than Him. I don't know. But that's sort of what I believe, that we're all connected, that we're all part of something larger. That idea of like raising the sparks and becoming bigger and trying to connect with each other, to try and be something bigger than ourselves. But at the same time, also trying to work to create something past ourselves, to move past, to connect with something external. That taking who we are to connect with something that's both who we are and not who we are, something separate but the same, and maybe even better, maybe even more a pure essence of what we are. That if we take something and make something better than ourselves and give it our love and compassion and teach it these positive things about ourselves and try and remove some of the negatives about ourselves, then that's what's important. That the act of creation is giving birth to something better than who we are, not something the same but better. And maybe that's what God was trying to do when he created Adam and Eve in the garden. Maybe he was trying to create something better than himself. And maybe we were, and maybe we weren't. I don't know.